Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks for joining for another lunchtime community webinar. My name is Stephen Thompson, and I'm the Events and Community Manager at the Data Lab. Today's session is the third session in our data visualization series, which we've been kind of running throughout November. And in a couple of minutes, I'll hand you over to our guest speaker today, which is Chris Weslake. Chris will speak for about 35-40 minutes before we open up to questions. So if you do have any questions, please do make sure to post them in the Q&A, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to those at the end. We should have plenty of time for questions, and we'll try to get through as many of them as we can. Just a little bit about the Data Lab community for those of you who might be new around here. The community is a space for anybody who's interested in data and AI, whether you're a student, a professional, an academic, or you're just generally interested in what's going on. It's a place where you can come on, connect with peers, and kind of learn and kind of find resources and join events. We run regular events like this one today. We also run in-person meetups around Scotland. We've got an online platform. We've got forums and discussion groups where you can get involved in conversations. And we also run a mentorship scheme, which is completely free to use. So if you've not already joined, you can scan the QR code, which should be in the corner of your screen at the moment. And I'll pop a link in the chat and once we get started as well. So throughout November, as I said, we've been focusing on data visualization in the community. We've had kind of themes around data visualization for the past 2 or 3 years in the community, and every year we're really blown away with the interest in this topic. So we're kind of delighted to be doing it again this year. So far this month, we've had 2 sessions already. We've had a session with Maria Fernanda from Flourish around kind of the fundamentals of data visualization. And we've also had an in-person meetup discussing the importance of understanding your audience when you're building a data visualization. We've still got lots to come as well. We've got sessions on building dashboards. We've also got a session on accessible data visualization, and obviously today's session around storytelling with data. So there's loads to look forward to. And if you've missed any of that in the previous, if you've missed any of the previous sessions, you can catch up with the recordings on the Data Lab's YouTube, and I'll post a link to that in the chat as well, just in case you're not familiar with that. The other thing we're running at the moment, you might be aware of, we're also running our data visualization competition. The competition this year will be focused on climate change and climate action. And to be in with a chance of winning, you need to build a data visualization using data that's provided by Edinburgh Climate Change Institute. And the top prize is worth over £500. So if you're interested in taking part, make sure to check that out. The data is available for you to start downloading, for you to start working on your project now. And the submission period, pardon me, will open from the 26th of November till the 16th of January. So still loads of time for you to get involved and kind of start building your visualization. We've had loads of interest already in the competition, and kind of really excited to see what comes in. So if you're planning to take part in the competition, or maybe you've already started on your project, let us know in the chat. Maybe say hello and let us know if you're getting involved in the competition. We'd love to hear from anybody who's here today who's taking part. And hopefully we'll see lots of stuff coming in over the next kind of couple of months in terms of entries for the competition. So on to today's session. I'm delighted to introduce Chris Weslake. Chris is a specialist business intelligence analyst at JLL, and he's also a co-lead for the Scotland Tableau user group. He's a Tableau public ambassador, and he was also crowned the 2024 champion of IronVis, which is the world's largest data visualization competition. So if you are interested in our competition, Chris is maybe a good person to listen to and potentially connect with. In this session today, Chris will take us beyond the kind of basic charting to explore the psychology of how people respond to data stories. We'll learn about the storytelling arc. You'll discover advanced techniques for guiding attention, and you'll also see real-world examples of data formatted into engaging stories. So enough from me. I'll pass you over to Chris, and I'll see you at the end for the Q&A. So yeah, please pop your questions in the Q&A, and we'll get to those at the end. Thanks, and over to you, Chris.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephen. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. I've been really enjoying some of the content that the Data Lab have been putting on this month already. And yeah, hopefully this is going to be as useful for you as some of that other stuff. So I'm here today to talk about storytelling and how we can go beyond graphs to kind of improve our data visualizations through telling stories specifically with our data. Stephen already introduced me, but there was something in this that I thought I'd just bring your notice to if you didn't notice it already, and that is you've heard the word Tableau a lot in my introduction. I think of myself more as a data visualization person. Tableau is just my favorite tool to do that with. And hopefully I'm not going too tool specific in what I'm saying today. I've tried to make it as kind of generic as possible, but if it does creep in, that's kind of why. So I thought I'd just share some of my other visualizations that I've done in Tableau, just so you can kind of get a feel of what I do and kind of where I'm coming from in what I'm going to say. So all of these were done earlier this year. This one looking at predicting the results of this year's Six Nations rugby competition. This looking at flavour profiles of various Scottish whiskies. Another rugby visualisation looking at the British and Irish Lions tour earlier this summer. A kind of more of a fun review of my year last year. And then I crossed 150 visualizations published on Tableau Public at some point last year. So I decided to make this kind of tartan view of all of my visualizations. But going in more to today's topic, and I want to take a step back just briefly from data storytelling and talk more about why we visualize data at all. And I think a lot of this comes down to how we experience our world. When you think of our five senses and how much of the world we kind of absorb through those senses, 90% of everything that we experience through sight, which leaves only 10% through hearing, touch, taste, and smell. So obviously visuals are incredibly important. Even as I'm talking to you now, you're probably getting a lot more out of what you're seeing on the slide than from what I'm saying. And if we experience that much of the world through sight, what does that mean about how we process things? If you take a document that's just text, we process it at a certain speed. If that text were to be converted into an image, studies show that we would process that up to 60,000 times faster, which is why it's really important to visualize our data and not just show it as tables of numbers, for example. Another way that I like to kind of explore this is through this example where a study was done where I think 100, 200 people were shown this paragraph and were told to remember it. And a few days later, they were asked to repeat how much of it they could remember. They just saw it for maybe 5 minutes. And I'll read it to you now. Tyrannosaurus rex was one of the largest meat-eating dinosaurs ever to stomp prehistoric soil. Everything about this ferocious predator, from a thick, heavy skull to a 4-foot-long jaw, was designed for maximum bone-crunching action. So a few days later, after hearing this, how much of it do you think you could remember? Well, the people in the study could remember 10% of it. Another group was studied where we had that same text, but we also had this image above it. So we started incorporating a visual element to this, a probably not very scientific or historically accurate representation here, a T-Rex chasing some people. It evokes a different emotion within us, and we attach ourselves to this in a slightly more real way. With the image, people are able to recall 65% of this text, which is already a massive, massive change. But what if we took this one step further? What if we changed the background, and rather than that beige color, we used the neon yellow, and we also put the words "Beware the T-Rex" in this neon pink banner? Suddenly, people can remember 82% of that text, which really goes to show how important visuals and colors and callouts are in how we remember information that we see. So what does this mean for insights? When we share insights, we want to achieve a few things. We want to grab audience attention. The people who are listening to what we're saying need to really be paying attention so that they can absorb it. We need to get the audience to understand your insight. If they don't understand it, they're probably going to stop paying attention pretty quickly. The next step is we want them to remember our insights. If they weren't paying attention, they didn't understand, they're not going to remember, and then they can't act on your insight, which is the fourth thing that we really want to do. Or to put it another way, the storytelling aura. Attention, understanding, remembering, and action. Daniel Kahneman, in his book Thinking Fast and Slow, says that no one ever made a decision because of a number. They need a story to go along with that number. So when we're creating charts, when we're using statistics, it's really important that we don't just present that number and pretend or act as if that's enough. We need to make it a more personal kind of setting for that number to sit in, and then people will remember it, they'll act on it. Another book that I'm going to reference a few times through this talk is one by Brent Dykes, and that's where this image comes from. And in his book, Effective Storytelling, he says that by telling stories through your data, you make that data more memorable, more engaging, and more persuasive. Or another quote, I promise I'll stop with the quotes soon. The human mind is a story processor, not a logic processor. We're humans. We're not AI, we're not chatbots. We need that personal engagement of data for us to be able to remember it. And if we can't remember it, we're not going to act. And really, when we're analyzing data and presenting our findings, the thing that we should be aiming to do is create action off the back of that. And so stories are essential as a way of doing this. So we have our data. Data is the foundation of every data story. If you're simply adding a few facts or figures to an existing narrative, it's just a story. It's not a data story. When you analyze the data and uncover a key insight, the story comes out of that to help you explain the meaning and significance of the insight to other people. We then looked at how we add visuals to this. And the visuals are the scenes of our data story. When the data is complex, visualizing it in data charts helps the audience to see things like anomalies, patterns, and trends, things that they might not otherwise see. Through the effective use of data visualization, diagrams, and images, you can enlighten your audience's mind to new perspectives. And then we add to that narrative. And narrative is the structure of your story. It's not just about the words or context that are used to explain the data, but how you organize the information into a meaningful and engaging storyline. In most cases, you're going to need to string together multiple data points or charts to tell your story. The narrative structure is what helps you decide what information to share and in what order. So in any visualization, I hope after this, you're going to incorporate all three of these elements. You probably already use data quite a lot. It's a data visualization meetup, so I'm assuming that you incorporate visuals as well, but I want to really highlight how important that narrative is to go along with that. So how do we structure those narratives? The storytelling arc is one of my favorite ways to do this because it's engaging, it gets people involved, and it's really easy to remember. It's a pattern that we're really familiar with, and it starts with creating a setting and a hook, a background on the current situation. Every day this happened. Or, yeah, I guess that. Then the next step is your rising insights, the supporting details that reveal deeper insights into the problem or opportunity. This is where you get a sudden kind of shift from the normal everyday thing that creates this kind of rising up towards your aha moment. Because that shift happened from the everyday, X happened, and because of X, Y, and because of Y, Z. And then you eventually arrive at your aha moment, which is your major finding or central insight. And this is what your whole story kind of hinges around. This is probably the most important part of your story. And by going through that setting and hook and the rising insights, people are more likely to be able to engage with that aha moment. They can see themselves in it and they can relate to it in a much more real way. After your aha moment, you probably have a solution or next steps, potential options and recommendations that you can apply that kind of carry you on forward beyond this. So you had that every day, this happened, and then there was a change. And because of that change, this, and this happened until one day, our aha moment, and then the kind of happily ever after, hopefully, of your story comes next. And I think when you follow this pattern, people are a lot more likely to act on as a result of hearing your story and seeing your data. And that's really important. So to put this in a kind of non-data context, first of all, this is a pattern that we've all seen before. And I want to just use one example of where we've probably seen it. Toy Story. Pixar used this kind of pattern for pretty much all of their films. And I think I'm going to say 95, 99% of films follow this same pattern. And books, everything that you see kind of follows this general theme that we've just talked about. So in the case of Toy Story, once upon a time, there was a toy cowboy named Woody. And Andy would play with Woody every day. He was his favorite toy. Until one day Buzz arrived and became Andy's favorite toy. And because of that, Woody got jealous. Because of that, Woody knocked Buzz out of the window. Because of that, the other toys knocked Woody out of the window. Because of that, Woody and Buzz had to work together to get back home to Andy. You see how we've climbed that hill towards the aha moment? And then it lands until finally they fly on a rocket and land inside Andy's car right before he moves away. If you just saw Woody and Buzz landing in that car, you wouldn't have that same attachment to the story. You need everything that's gone on before it to really understand in context what the significance of that event is. And ever since, Woody and Buzz have been great friends. So you see how you go from that initial setting through the insights and then to your happily ever after at the end. Obviously, with data, we can't follow exactly the same pattern for everything. And there are a few different ways that I kind of like to think about this. And that is looking at past events, present events, and then what this means for our future. Or the current problem that we have, which is a really common way to look at data, kind of using it to address a problem, to then think about the potential solutions to that problem as the data presents them, and then to look at the benefit that that solution would bring. Something that we talk a lot about in my team at JLL is the what, so what, now what view of this. In our visualizations, we've always historically been really good at talking about the what. And a few years ago, we started incorporating the so what, kind of why does that matter? What does that actually mean for us? But what we've really been trying to do in the last year is to push on beyond that and look at the now what. What does this mean for our everyday now? So hopefully that kind of gives you a flavor of what we want to achieve through our data stories. But what does this look like with data? I'm going to talk through 3 examples. One of a kind of self-service BI method, one that's a more scrolly telling, the user tells their own story through a dashboard that I created, and one that I presented myself. So the first one is a business example, and this isn't the real dashboard. I think my client would have been quite annoyed if I'd used their real data in this, but JLL is a property management company. So in my team, we look after the buildings for this particular client across the globe, talking about office buildings, warehouses, all that kind of thing. And we generally try and keep the lights on so that everything's working in a reasonable way and the offices are a nice environment for people to go into. Work orders get raised when there's an issue, and these get logged in a system. and they're a way of kind of alerting different teams that something needs to be changed. And that's what you're seeing in this heat map on the right. Across the top is days of the week, and down the side is the hours of the day. It's not a perfect chart. I did get AI to create this for me. It is what it is. These work orders can be raised at any time of day by any user of the office. And this dashboard is also filtered to a particular floor of one office. We see that there's a spike on Thursday morning, that blue dot that's quite high up in the middle of the screen, kind of occurring before people have really come in to the office to start their day's work. What could be going wrong? A lot of these are cleaning work orders, suggesting that that floor of the office isn't clean when people arrive to work on the day, which is bizarre because nobody's been there. Surely the cleaners, when they came in the night before, would have cleaned the building, would have gone through that floor and ensured that everything was ready for the next day. In discussions with cleaners, because of this data point that jumped out, we found out that they don't have access to that floor to clean on Wednesday evenings. For whatever reason, their swipe cards work on every floor, every day of the week, but this floor, it doesn't work on a Thursday. Not sure why, but it meant because we discovered this, we were able to fix the cleaner's entry card permissions to give them access to that floor. And as a result, the number of work orders dropped significantly at this time. The end result of this was that it saved the business a lot of money, a lot of kind of hassle trying to keep people happy. And people were happier and more comfortable when they came into work because they weren't sighing every Thursday as they sat down at their desk and saw that it hadn't been cleaned again this week. And this had been going on for months, possibly even years. So by giving our users the ability to drill down into data and also giving them the skills that they need to be able to tell stories in an effective way, to give them that framework of create the setting, create the hook, and then the rising insights. And then you're able to take that information to your stakeholders to address the problem and find a solution. Another example is a visualization that I created a couple of years ago, and I'm going to hopefully bring it up on screen. So this visualization is looking at my love for food. So the kind of general setting is that I love cooking food, I love eating food, and I love sharing food. It's my favorite thing to do is to cook for people, to have people over for dinner, and just have a really nice time enjoying food. Every evening, it's my favorite way to unwind after a busy working day. I've also included in here 6 of my favorite recipes that I like to cook. Within here, you're able to see some details of why I like each recipe, the ingredients that you would need to create the recipe, to create the dish yourself, and also the method that's involved. And each of these squares is colored by the food type and shows you each ingredient as a proportion of the overall dish. But then as you come down, the picture changes. We're not talking about my love for food anymore. We've kind of gone away from that setting, that background, and we're now looking at things from a different angle. While I enjoy eating these recipes, making these dishes, almost 740 million people in the world, nearly 10% of the global population, don't have that luxury. This is the number of people thought to be suffering in undernourishment in 2021. We then come down into this trend chart and we start to look at a kind of, I guess, a rising insight into how long this has been going on for and what the extended time period picture is, rather than just that static latest value. And we see that things have, in general, gotten better. They were getting better quite rapidly, but in the early 2000s, And then potentially the financial crisis of 2008 took a toll, and that progress kind of stalled a bit. In 2015, the UN introduced Sustainable Development Goals, one of which is to reduce undernourishment to 0 by 2030. Unfortunately, events in the world like global pandemics and conflicts, various natural disasters, has meant that we're now further away from that target than we were when the UN announced it. But we can then ask, where in the world is there undernourishment? Peeling back another layer, looking for another rising insight in this data. And we see here the world broken down into 7 main areas, ordered from the highest rate of undernourishment across all countries within that region to the lowest. And within here, you've got a time view of that region compared to the others. And we can also drill in to see the individual countries within that region. And within here, what you can also uncover is how much change there's been for each country. So we see a country like Angola has got a massive decrease in undernourishment over those 20 years from 2001 to 2021. That's not the same case for a country like Madagascar, where undernourishment has gone up, so much so that they're now the country in the world that has the highest rate of undernourishment. The only country that sits at over 51% of their population struggling to find the food that they need each day. Madagascar is also a really interesting case from another angle, which isn't in the visualization, but they are the country with the lowest GDP that can successfully apply for international aid. So not only do they have this huge issue of undernourishment, they're also not eligible to apply for the help that they maybe need to get themselves out of that situation. So it's a really sad place that Madagascar's in. But then the aha moment, maybe once we've created that storyline, what can we do to improve it? What's the end goal? What are we trying to achieve? What's our solution? How can we end undernourishment? Poverty is often the first thing that we think of when we think about global hunger. And there are 3 things that we can maybe do to influence levels of poverty within different countries. Education, gender equality, and climate change all have an impact. You can see I've used various indices for each of these. So as your level of education increases along this x-axis, your level of undernourishment decreases. That goes the same for the Women, Peace and Security Index. The more freedom that women have, the more rights women have within a country, within an economy, the lower the level of undernourishment tends to be. Climate change has a not so strong kind of association, but as your world risk index increases, the amount of undernourishment increases as well. So we can also drill into this to kind of find out more about the world risk index and how it's made up. So within here, you can see kind of all of the components that go into that index. So stuff like exposure to risk, which looks at how much a population is exposed to natural disasters, and where we have a really high level of that is countries like Vanuatu, Dominica, all these that kind of sit on like fault lines. They're more prone to earthquakes and other natural disasters. But like I said, there's not a massive trend with undernourishment in these countries. And then the kind of happily ever after, if you will, if there is one. The kind of overarching topic of this was always intended to be that of love. I started by talking about my love of food, and I wanted to end this by talking about what makes my heart full about this topic. And it's quite simple, that it shows how humanity can make progress. It reflects our collective efforts to address the underlying causes and develop sustainable solutions. What you saw in that data was in that 20-year period, 23 countries reduced their prevalence of undernourishment to below 2.5%, which is the lowest value that the UN will ever report. There are also a further 70 countries that have made progress in this direction. And then I finished the visualization with a call to action, saying that together we can work towards a world where undernourishment is a thing of the past, and highlighting places that people, viewers of this dashboard, can go in and see how they can make an impact to this cause. So hopefully by going from that kind of initial setting, a story that's very personal to me, to then drilling into something that admittedly is kind of a long way from my reality, really helps people kind of put themselves in those different shoes and those different positions, and kind of creates that emotional attachment to the story. And then you see the solution come into play, and kind of how we can make steps to that. And then there's also the now what. Now that we've seen all of that data, all that information, we know that there are so many people in the world that are struggling with these exact problems. What can we do about it to make their lives a little bit better? Looking for my slides. So this visualization I entered for Tableau's IronVis competition in 2024. And IronVis entries are judged on 3 criteria. The first is analysis and how sophisticated and appropriate the data is that's being used for the topic. The design, which is another really important element of data visualization. And the third judging criteria is storytelling. Is there that clear story being told or a question being explored? After submitting this for IronVis, I kind of forgot about it for a couple of months, and then I got an email through saying that I was in the final for IronVis 2024, which Stephen mentioned in the introduction is the world's largest data visualization competition. So to put it another way, I had to go into this room, stand on that stage. There's a tiny me just to the left of the aisle, right at the front, in front of about 8,000 people. I had to build a data visualization within 20 minutes using Tableau, and then I had 3 minutes to tell a story from that data visualization. And what I want to do is tell that story that I told, because it illustrates another kind of way of telling data stories. It's not people going into our visualizations that we create and finding the stories for themselves. It's not them exploring one specific story that you've found and presented in a more static way, like my love for food viz. It's different when you're there to talk people through it. So I was going to do this through a video. The video was buffering quite a lot when we tried it earlier, so I am instead going to try and walk you through it like this. Hopefully it's not going to crash out on me. So the data that I was given for the IronVis final was looking at IMDb TV series ratings. So the IMDb Explorer that I created looks at the 250 most voted for shows across IMDb's platform. What you're seeing on this scatter plot is those shows' average ratings across the bottom and the number of votes. And what immediately jumps out at you is the presence of Game of Thrones and Breaking Bad as being very highly popular and highly rated shows. But we can also change that vertical axis to look at the number of episodes within a series. And if we reduce our series rating down to just those shows that score 9 out of 10 or higher, We then see that there's one that sits above the rest, The Office, which, because I was presenting this to a largely American audience, The American Office is a very popular TV show. So I selected that to tell the story of, because people were already familiar with it. It was kind of a story that people knew, and hopefully some of you will as well as I click through this. So clicking on that dot, we then have the option to explore the series episode by episode, which gives us this radial chart, which shows all of the show's 188 episodes from a rating of 0 down in the middle to a rating of 10 out of 10 on the outside. You've also got solid lines within each kind of section here, which shows you the average rating of each episode within a season. And then this dotted line shows you the average rating of the show as a whole. And there are a handful of episodes that sit above that show's overall rating, which are the ones that we remember the most. Things like, I used to know exactly where they were. The Niagara episodes, for example, Stress Relief, and Goodbye Michael, which was the highest rated episode for the whole show. We then see, after season 7, there's this big drop-off in the show's ratings. And I was interested to know why that was. So let's look at this from a slightly different angle and look at the cast members and see if they can uncover why this might be. Here on the right, we've then got a list of all the cast members that show up in each show, in each episode. And if we hover on Steve Carell, who played Michael Scott, the leading character, we see that he disappears after season 7. So maybe that's why the show declined so much. But we can also ask where he went instead. What was better for him to do than be on The Office? We see here with a chart that shows us all of the TV episodes that Steve Carell featured in, that between starring in The Office and appearing in Space Force, he hardly featured on television at all. By looking at his awards, we kind of get a picture of what he was doing instead. His awards in that gap for TV disappear, but film awards suddenly go through the roof. He'd, in a sense, transcended the television screen and was onto a more global stage. So now that we've reached the end of that, what if you've never watched The Office? What if you don't even know what The Office is? Maybe you want to explore different shows. The power of this visualization is that you can click on any of these dots, split the data any way you want to find your favorite show and explore it in the same way. And by giving users that kind of ability to then go away and use the data, you kind of bring in the benefits of storytelling from that first example that I told as well. So just to wrap up, when you're building your visualizations, try and keep in mind the storytelling aura, that you really want your audience to pay attention to what you're saying through your data. You want them to understand what your message is. You want them to remember that message. And most importantly, you want them to act as a result. Like I said, a lot of what I've used here comes from Brent Dyke's book, Effective Data Storytelling. Another great resource is Storytelling with Data, which is a company led by Cole Knaflick. They've got 4 books. This one was the first one. I'd really encourage you to go and look out for both of these resources if you want to know more about storytelling and kind of a deeper dive into this. Equally, if you've liked how I've explained things and want to know more about me and my journey, I have a website, westlakeanalytics.com, where I post regular blogs. They are fairly Tableau centric, but hopefully there's stuff in there for you if you don't use Tableau as well. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening, and hopefully that was useful.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Chris. Yeah, that was really interesting. I heard you speak a few times around data visualization. It's always interesting and there's always something new in there. So thanks a lot for speaking. We've got a few people who unfortunately had to leave early who have sent their thanks as well. So yeah, I think it's gone down well. We've got a lot of questions that have come in as well. So we've got a decent bit of time to get through them. So hopefully we can get through everything. And if you've got a question that you've not asked yet, pop it in the Q&A and hopefully we'll be able to manage to get to it before we wrap up. So just getting started, there's a question coming from Tom. He's asking, when you're telling a story with data, how do you avoid your own biases or personal beliefs kind of influencing the story that you're telling? Like, is there a chance that you could use the data to reinforce a story that you want to tell and not the story that should be told?
Yeah, that definitely is. Kind of as with everything, we're kind of very prone to attaching our own views and opinions to it. And I think trying to have that kind of, I guess, a more broader outlook and trying to really go into things and understand them from a data perspective. I kind of try and leave my own opinions and views at the door a lot, and through exploratory data analysis, try and work out what the data's actually saying. You can also kind of base a lot of this on your audience. So if you think about who your audience is, you should be able to kind of meet them where they are. And then if you look at the specific question that you're trying to answer through your visualization, you can hopefully find a way to navigate between kind of your personal views, and hopefully they won't conflict what the data, or they won't have too much of a bearing on how you present the data.
Yeah, I guess maybe also maybe it depends on the why you're making the data visualization. If it's something for fun that you're interested in, you might want to kind of tell a story that you specifically
Completely.
are interested in. But if it's something for somebody else, you have to be mindful of what they're looking for. I guess this leads on to another question from Tom, which is saying, do you think telling a story with the arc that you mentioned, the sort of storytelling arc, is needed for every visualization that we make? Sometimes people just want to skip to the end of the movie, so to speak. So I guess kind of like what you're saying there about depending on the audience you're speaking to.
Yeah, completely. It very much depends, as with everything in data visualization. I think there's an example that we use at work that kind of looks at how complicated a system is versus how beneficial finding a solution could be, and it kind of plots that into a quadrant. I wish I had the image to share with you right now, but you end up with this kind of top right quadrant being like big issues that will present a big opportunity if we solve them, and that's where you really want to focus your storytelling efforts. In the rest of these, there's probably not such a key need for a story. Yeah, hopefully that helps.
I guess as well, if you know what your audience is actually looking for, you can save yourself a lot of time. If they're not looking for
Completely.
a long story to convince them, they just want a graph that gives them the information they need, then you don't have to spend all that time on something.
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay, so Rachel is asking, how much topic-specific knowledge do you need, do you think? So Rachel says, I'm keen to move from finance into a different sector, but I'm unsure about how much sector-specific knowledge I need to be able to do a good job.
I would say that you don't need a huge amount. In my career, I've worked across 4 different sectors, and it maybe takes a bit more time to settle into a job and to kind of understand the nuances of that particular sector. Like, I talked a lot about work orders in one of those examples. Before I started my current job, I had no idea what a work order was, and probably quite a few of you don't either. But I find that if people who have hired you know that you've come from a different sector, they're not going to expect that kind of full knowledge of their data, and you can build it up gradually as you go. So don't let that be a kind of barrier to entry for you if you want to move into a different sector, especially if it's something that you can connect more with. It's a lot easier to pick something up like that.
Yes, yeah, be if you're honest in your interview or your kind of
Completely.
recruitment process, then there's no surprises when you get there and they realize you have no idea what it is that they do. Okay, there's still quite a lot coming in now actually, so I'll have a little look through these. So we've got uh I'm not sure who this is. HFA might be an abbreviation or an acronym. You mentioned in the IronViz competition that you kind of built that data visualization in 20 minutes on stage, and they're asking, do you have any tips for creating a data viz under a tight time constraint? And I know from previous conversations that it wasn't quite as it wasn't like fully out of the blue on stage.
Yeah. So we had
for general time constraints with data visualization, do you have any tips?
Yeah, so with IronViz, we were told what the data would be a month before. So I kind of had that time to plan and work out what I wanted to do. I think in more general settings, trying to be very focused and plan out what you want to do is a really good way. I tend to, when I'm building visualizations, start by writing questions on post-it notes that kind of come to me about the data. Obviously, if you've been given a question already, that's a really useful starting point, and kind of just explore the data, focusing on that one question. And if you start noticing that you're veering away from that, it's going to cost you time and it's not going to kind of fulfill what the visualization's purpose is. So yeah, staying focused, I think, is the best way to not take up too much of your time.
Right, thank you. So Kevin Flanagan's asking, one of the main problems with data viz are the trade-offs between our desire for novelty, our need to reduce complexity, data literacy, and the overwhelming need not to miss the outlier. How do you tell stories that meet these needs in very frequently used data visualizations?
That is a big question. I think keeping things simple is kind of the most important thing. I know that some of my visualizations, like some of the ones I showed you at the start, and even that radial chart that's in my IronViz final dashboard, are kind of more novel and probably introduce a lot of complexity. There's nothing wrong with a bar chart or a scatter plot. And actually, that visualization that I did that got me into the IronViz final is just bar charts, line charts, and scatter plots. So kind of using those data chart types that we're really familiar with and that most people can read and can understand, I think also helps with that data literacy element of the question as well. The not missing outlier is an interesting one.
At the meetup we ran last week, Nicola Rennie kind of touched on this a little bit as well, and kind of explained that there's no harm in using text and words to guide the user through the graph or through the visualization you're using as well. So if it's something that they're not maybe necessarily familiar with, you can try and guide them through how they should be interpreting that type of visualization.
Definitely, yeah.
Okay, so Gary Ennis is asking, Chris, are you involved in data collection / research at all, or just on the data viz side of existing data already? Keen to know how far your data passion goes.
Just data viz, really. Some of the stuff that's on my Tableau Public profile that I've done for fun, I collected data myself. So I've got a visualization looking at the 2003 Rugby World Cup final, where I sat down and watched the final in full, I think 3 times over one weekend, and made notes of data points at kind of 15-second intervals, and created a data set that way. It's not something that I do a huge amount, but kind of where you're super interested in the data and it just doesn't exist, it's always an option to add it, to create it yourself.
Presumably you're a big rugby fan if you watched the final.
Yeah.
You have to watch the same game 3 times.
And maybe a bit too English for this audience as well.
Okay, cool. So Andrew is asking, great ideas, Chris. Thank you. When designing the flow of a story, do you draw on any UX principles in particular to aid you, or is it just mainly the storytelling arc matched to the type of data?
I think it's mainly the storytelling arc that I tend to use.
Cool. And then Julianne is asking, when creating data visualizations, how much detail is enough detail and how much detail is too much?
How long is the piece of string? It again, it really depends. You kind of want. I think it does come back to that. Have a question in mind when you start exploring your data, and once you've answered that question, everything else is possibly just adding noise. But yeah, it really does depend.
Cool. The next one's a bit more another kind of career type question from Maria. That's how long have you been working in data viz, and how long did it take you to get to kind of this level of kind of proficiency?
So I started using Tableau, which is really where my data viz journey began in 2018. I was still at uni. I was in my final year of university then, and have kind of been working solely in data viz and Tableau for the last 5 years.
So yeah, I guess 2018 also a good period of time through lockdown to hone your skills
Completely.
when
Yeah,
we were all stuck at home.
the
But yeah, I
timing.
guess also depends how much time you've got
Yeah.
personally in your own life, Maria, to kind of dedicate to it. And it's similar, well, not similar, but around the kind of the the doing side of data viz. Gary's asking, Tableau is a great product, but it's very pricey. What alternative tools might you suggest for small and micro businesses that are looking to delve into data viz?
I don't like telling people that Power BI is cheaper generally, but it is. Um, I also think there's a lot of data visualization that you can do through tools like Python and R, which is a lot more code heavy than Tableau is, but the power of those tools is really coming a long way. Depending on the kind of size of the business and kind of what data you're using, Tableau do offer a free version, which is Tableau Public, which has kind of basically all of the features of normal Tableau, just without the data security, because people can download your work from Tableau Public. But it might be a good avenue to start on.
A very good starting point. Yeah. So we've just got two more questions here. We've got one from HFA who is asking, how do you approach more unusual designs? For example, your summary of 2024 was snaking across the page. Do you manipulate a final output or do you build in a certain way?
So that one is built in a certain way. So that's using Tableau's feature called map layers, which basically turns Tableau into a series of coordinates. So from there, you can then plot points along a curvy line using lots of high school trigonometry and stuff that then creates that end result. Um, Lots of sketches, lots of screwing up. It took a long time.
So yeah, do you like you can be pretty creative with your data visualizations. Have you got like a creative background before you got into data visualization?
Not at all. I kind of tend to see other people's work that I really enjoy. People like Nadia Bremer, who's quite a big voice in the data viz community. She does a lot of kind of data art stuff, which I think inspires a lot of what I do. Um, but yeah, I don't have a huge creative background. I can't draw to save my life. And until a few years ago, I wouldn't have said I was kind of creative or arty at all.
Well, there you go, a cross between data and creativity. And then, so last question is from M Black. How could you get the public to submit data to a visualization, I guess an existing visualization, and then watch the data that they add make kind of, I guess, watch the data visualization evolve as more data is added to it? Is that something you've done, or is there a way to do that? I guess
It's
you'd want to
something
kind
we've
of
done.
have some control over the data that was being added.
Yeah, something that we've done a little bit at work. Making those changes instantaneously is quite difficult because of kind of the processing speed of loading data and refreshing it just constantly. But there are tools out there. I think Info Topics have a tool that works really well with Tableau to do that kind of thing. But I'm not sure other than it's not something I've looked into hugely, I'm afraid.
Fair enough. Well, yeah, I think that's us through all the questions. We've got lots of comments in the chat from people thanking you for the session. So thanks again, Chris, from me as well. It's been really interesting and kind of great to see some more of the work you've been doing. We've still got another couple of webinars left this month around the data visualization theme. So the next one is next week. I think it's the 25th, around building dashboards. And then on the 28th, we've got another webinar around accessibility in data visualization. So how to make sure that your data viz is accessible, especially with that kind of new AI tools coming into the field, I guess. So thanks again, Chris. Hopefully see as many of you as we can at the next webinars. And if you want to sign up to those, you can find them on the events board in the community. So cheers again, Chris, and see you next time.
Thank you.